overpriced is not the same as going down tomorrow. And if you bear that simple truth in mind, I think it helps. So Taleb and the role of luck, very important. Then John Kenneth Galbraith. John Kenneth Galbraith, for those of you who are not familiar with ancient history, was an economist, American economist, died around '05, I think, maybe a little after, and at the age of about 98. And he was one of my favorites. He was a little on the left side. He was, somewhere between free enterprise and socialism, but he was what we call a liberal in the days when it was okay to say that word. But he was very, very smart, and he was not famous as an economist, but he played a lot of roles in government, and he was a diplomat. But he wrote some very good books, and one of them is called A Short History of Financial Euphoria. And I like thin books, and his is thin, especially the ones he wrote in the last decade or two of his life were very thin. So I enjoyed those. But the short history is very good, and I recommend that to you. And one of the things he says is we have two classes of forecasters, the ones who don't know and the ones who don't know they don't know. Now, I don't believe in forecasts, macro forecasts. People who forecast interest rates, performance of economies, performance of stock markets. And I don't think that my efforts to be a superior investor and most other people's are aided by macro forecasts. So am I saying that the forecaster is never right? No, I'm not saying that. The forecasters are often right. Last year, GDP grew 2%. Many forecasters forecast that GDP will grow this year at 2%. That's called extrapolation. And usually in economics, extrapolation works. Usually the future looks like the recent past. So usually the people who forecast a continuation of the current are right. The only problem is they don't make any money. Because let's take the economy. Most people forecast 2-something for this year. A growth rate of 2-something is cooked into the prices of securities today. If the growth rate turns out to be 2-something, everybody who forecasted that will be right, but security prices will not change much because that 2-something growth was anticipated and discounted a year or two ago. So all those people who are right won't make any money. Our forecast, so that's a correct. So most forecasts, extrapolation works all the time. Forecasts that are extrapolations work all the time, but they don't make any money. Logically, am I saying that forecasts never make any money? No. The forecasts that make money are the forecasts of radical change. If everybody's predicting 2.4% growth for this year, and if I predict -2, and it turns out to be -2, or I predict 6 and it turns out to be 6, I'll make a lot of money. So forecasts which are not extrapolations, forecasts which are radically different from the recent past, are potentially very valuable if they're correct. Of course, they're not of any value if they're incorrect. And if they're incorrect, they'll cost you a lot of money. If everybody else thinks it's going to be 2.4 and you predict 6 and it turns out at 2.4, you're probably going to have taken the wrong investments and lost a lot of money. So deviant forecasts, which turn out to be right, are potentially very valuable, but it's very hard to make them. It's very hard to make them correctly. It's very hard to make them correctly consistently. And somebody at lunch mentioned an early memo I wrote called The Value of Forecasts. And in one of, there was the value of forecasts, and then there was value of forecasts 2, I think, right? And in one of those, I reviewed the recent history of the Wall Street Journal poll. Every 6 months, the Wall Street Journal publishes the results of a poll of economists. And on, GDP growth, CPI, value of a dollar, the price of oil, whatever it might be, a bunch of phenomena. They do it consistently. And they ask like 30 people consistently over time. And so it shows basically that most of the time when people get it right, it's because they predicted extrapolation and nothing changed. Once in a while, something changes radically, and invariably somebody predicted it. But the problem is, if you look at that person's other forecasts over the years, you see that that person always made radical forecasts and never was right any other time. So of course, if you're getting your information from a forecaster, the fact that he was right once doesn't tell you anything. You wouldn't, the views of that forecaster would not be of any value to you unless he was right consistently. And nobody's right consistently in making deviant forecasts. So the bottom line for me is that forecasting is not valuable. And that's something that my experience has told me. So we don't know what's going to happen, and randomness will play a big role in what happens. And randomness is, by definition, unpredictable.